There's news in the NFL today, and it's time to break it down in the only way we know how. Hot Route style, with our spin on football headlines with a mix of frozen tundras, neck rolls, and grass-stained jersey.
Hello and welcome back to Hot Routes. I'm your host, as always, Paul Hodowanic, and with me today is Purple Insider's own Sam Ekstrom. Sam, how are we doing today?
Today we're pouring out my morning coffee to John Madden. May he rest in peace. I don't know about you, but I've been consuming John Madden content on Twitter for the last 12 hours or so, and it's been a lot of fun to reminisce. So I don't know if that was part of your rundown of questions, but I feel like we should take a minute just to discuss the John Madden impact. Was he we're both maybe a little young for Madden. Now, I grew up with him in the 90s and then obviously the 2000s. What was sort of your Madden exposure, Paul?
Strictly, I'm 22, so my Madden exposure was pretty much strictly the video game. Okay. Hearing his calls on that, and then just hearing his historic calls, going through history, but never really in my life as a coach or really as a broadcaster at any point. So I was someone who was ready to get the Madden game every year and was constantly playing it. And for a while, it was his voice on there, and then it switched. But that's how I grew up with John Madden, and it's been said all over Twitter if you've been on it. But it's cool that we all have our own. The different generations have their own connectivity to Madden, and it all kind of comes together to being one of the NFL's most important, most impactful people in general. Because for me, I don't remember much as what he did for a coach, but I'm sure many of our people that are watching do. So yeah, for me, it was strictly Madden, and I was always Madden, the football game, video game, and I was always super excited to get that game. And hopefully his name stays on it for the rest of the time.
Yeah, Madden, for whatever reason, Madden 2001 was the game that stuck with me the most, with Eddie George on the cover. And I remember I would just run the toss sweep over and over. And there was a glitch in the game where the edge never really set on defense, and you were just able to get outside every time and get 15 yards. It was awesome.
And I think corner strike, the play was always one that I could go to in a 4th and 22. Corner strike's going to get me the yards. That was just always the go-to.
Everybody had their sort of pet play that just worked every time. It was great. And on those early games, you could find sort of the glitches in the system. But I would play it on traditional computer. But at that time, I was always thrown off by Summerall. Madden and Summerall were the big pairing, right? And people disagree with me on this. I was not a Summerall guy, and I still am not a Summerall guy. I think it's great, to say nothing as a play-by-play guy. Good for you. You're a minimalist. I get it. But it's not for my taste. Say something. Have some personality. You don't have to have 0% and let John Madden have all of it. You're allowed to have some give and take, Pat. So there's my Pat Summerall slander for the day. I think may he rest in peace as well. I don't think Pat Summerall's with us either. But John Madden, I always appreciated. I was part of his entire run with Al Michaels, in 2000. And I think he was done after the 2009 or 10 Super Bowl with the Cardinals and Steelers. And I remember him calling James Harrison's 100-yard interception returns. So he was still doing it at a high level not that long ago. And the fact that his documentary aired Sunday and he watched it and he was part of it, and then we don't know the cause of this passing, but for it to happen so suddenly and so soon after is just wild.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten a chance to watch the documentary. Hope to soon. Hope everyone else gets a chance. But yeah, great that he was able to see that and see the impact that he had on so many people. Let's jump into our Hot Routes questions. The first one I think is quick, but and not quite in our Hot Route style, but wanted to get it because it's Packers week and it is the last time that Aaron Rodgers potentially could be playing against the Vikings as a member of the Green Bay Packers. And so I want to know from you, do you think it is? Is this the last time Aaron Rodgers plays as a Packer against the Vikings?
I kind of get the sense that it's not. And I think that the writing was going to be on the wall for this. The second that he decided to come back and give that extra year of opportunity for Green Bay to sort of make right. Everything you hear is that it's all kumbaya. And you know why? It's because they're winning. It's because they are 12-3 and they're going to be the top seed and everything's good. Like winning does really salve all of the wounds, and maybe some understandings have been reached. And maybe Aaron Rodgers, amidst all the scrutiny, isn't really interested in leaving this community that loves him and going to a media market that might be a little more fierce. Maybe that doesn't all seem as appealing as it once did, now that there's maybe some more negative things to talk about with Aaron Rodgers. So I could see a reunion occurring. Or, you know what else I could see, Paul, is a retirement. I mean, everything with Rodgers this year has sort of felt, I don't know, a little bit like a last hurrah, with the way that he does post-game interviews, and he sort of has talked romantically about the game, and you know, he passed Brett Favre's record. Like, he's reached a lot of milestones. And particularly if they go out on top with a Super Bowl, which is obviously on the table, with the path going through Lambeau Field to reach it, probably, I could see him riding off in the sunset. He's got this, I can't remember if it's wife or fiance at this point, wants to have kids, I believe. Like, I could see Rodgers, who kind of goes by the beat of his own drum, hanging it up and calling it good, because I think he has other interests. And I think that maybe he just doesn't want to start over. His body's hurting right now. It might feel pretty good to just walk away on top. So if he's not playing the Vikings again, I think it might be because he's not playing football anymore.
All right. Wow. All right. I wasn't expecting that to be hot at the start, and then we got there. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, before the season, it was such a foregone conclusion that if he stayed this year, he was gone the next year. That seemed to be kind of their agreement. You know, we don't know if that has changed at this point. But yeah, I'm also with you in that I can't say it's going to be his last one until we see him change jerseys. And maybe that's me growing up in Minnesota, just in my entire life, the Green Bay Packers having an elite quarterback and not quite knowing what it would look like if they didn't, and what the Packers would look like if they didn't. But something tells me, like, I'm not going to count him out playing. And honestly, if the Vikings win this game, as much as we have been down in the dumps about their playoff chances, if they win this game, there's a chance that could be a 2-7 matchup in the playoffs. It might not even be the last time they play this season if they get this win, because then obviously Green Bay loses. They lose a little bit in the first round bye. I think they might even have to lose in week 18 to lose that as well. But I mean, it's a possibility there. So it might not even be the last time they play this season, depending on how Sunday goes. But yes, something tells me this isn't his last time here, or his last time against the Vikings. And I think that feeling's just never going to go away until he's actually on the Broncos, or he's retired, or he's on the Steelers, or something else like that. But that's just how I feel.
Yeah, I think we can safely assume, though, that he's not going to make the same mistake as Favre. He's not going to endanger his legacy there and come to the division rival Vikings. I think Vikings fans were hopeful there for a minute that he was so disenchanted that he was going to make the jump a la Favre. But I get the feeling that that's not going to happen.
All right, let's move on. I want to rank some things, and I want to rank the officials, because it has been a controversial season. A few weeks, last week, every week, it seems like officials are making some decision in the Vikings game or in any other game. Looking at that Green Bay Cleveland game, specifically on Christmas, or some of the calls that were made in the Vikings Bears game. But the officials have not been good, and it has been a large talking point. And so I wanted to put in perspective, like, I think every sport complains about officiating. And so I want to take this time to kind of stack up the NFL officials against the other major sport officials. Just if we can see are they the worst of the worst, or is this just, it's the time of the year where football's on, and so we're going to complain about those officials, but now once they end and the NBA playoffs come, then we're complaining about those officials. Like, how bad is it? Let's rank the top, the four major sport officials.
Yeah. Okay. So I did give this a lot of thought. I think hockey is the best.
Okay.
I think hockey officials, they stay out of the way. They're rarely the story. Every goal is reviewed, so it's not like points are getting put on the board fraudulently. I think the biggest gripe for hockey officials is when power plays are awarded when they shouldn't be, or vice versa. But you know what? Even if you give a team a power play they don't deserve, there's still like a 1 in 4 chance they convert. I just think that there's less to screw up for hockey officials. And honestly, you have to look too at like what the review system is for the sport, because if their mistakes can be challenged or overturned fairly easily, then I think that mitigates some of the issues too. And a lot of stuff now in hockey is reviewable. Every sport is trending that way. And I think that's the case in basketball as well. Basketball is crazy because the whistle blows, I think, more than any other sport. And for that reason, it almost dilutes the officials' impact during like the major, like the meat of the game. But then you get to the final 2 minutes, right? That's when the NBA releases the officials report, and sometimes it's pretty ugly. The fans are probably most vociferous in like hating on basketball officials, and yet I still feel like they do a pretty good job. I think that most of their mistakes can be overturned or reviewed in the critical parts of the game. And they've got a really tough job. They also have they can still see the whole floor. Typically, they're not missing calls. And a lot of the stuff they do miss can be fixed. So now we're down to baseball and football, which I think are the two worst. I think baseball home plate umpires are atrocious. I think they need a better system. I think robot umps for the strike zone would be great. But at the end of the day, baseball hitters still get 4 at-bats a game. They still get 3 strikes. So if they miss a strike call in an at-bat, which happens all the time, the hitters still have a chance, right? There's 27 outs in the game. If 1 out is recorded at a bad time, you still have 26 more outs. I think football is the worst, because it is literally impossible for them to see all 22 players. And every play just carries more meaning. Like if you are given a team a bad PI call for 40 yards, it like swings the win probability more than any other sport, I think. And then you run into these weird, wrinkles in the rule book where like Cooper Kupp fumbles the ball and forward progress is ruled and you can't review it all of a sudden. That's weird. It seems to be harder sometimes to correct, you can't really correct penalties in the NFL because it's just not reviewable plays. The officials have a lot of power, and that power swings the game drastically. So for that reason, I think that NFL officiating, for its inconsistency, constantly moving the bar and changing the goalposts, I think that's the worst officiated sport.
All right. I had a very similar list, but I'm going to say something that probably, you definitely don't agree with. I don't think the MLB officiating or umpiring is as bad as the NBA. So I have NHL, then MLB, then NBA, then NFL. And then I just threw in college football last because they're even worse than the pros for me. But my thing with the MLB is it goes back to what you said in that 1 strike isn't going to affect the game as much as a pass interference call is going to. And maybe it's sympathy for seeing the ball go 100 miles an hour right into that strike zone. Like it can be hard. I think that one, MLB umpiring has to be, especially behind home plate, has to be one of the toughest jobs of an umpire that you can have. As much as the catchers are trying to fool you and how they're moving the ball around. And in general, pretty much every other call is either reviewable or they get right. It's really just those strike calls, but you're not getting really any problems with he was safe at first, he's not safe at first. Like they have the technology to solve that. They have the technology to solve pretty much every other scenario except the home plate umpiring. And so maybe it's a sympathy I have for it as a former 5th grade umpire, and not even being able to accurately have a strike zone for 5th graders throwing 40 miles an hour and me struggling to do that. So maybe it's my own sympathy and bias coming in, but I'm going to put the MLB a little bit higher. And I think robot umpires, at least for home, would maybe bump them up all the way to the top if they can get that solved. But that is definitely the one bad thing. But I think it rises above some of the NBA calls that we have been seeing, especially if you're a Timberwolves fan and you've seen some of the recent calls. Maybe that's more of my bias coming out. But there have been some tough calls on the Timberwolves this season. So that I'm moving MLB up just a little bit. Let's move on to our third hot route. And I want to compare NBA to NFL again in this way, because if you've been watching the NBA, you've been seeing, I mean, the Timberwolves just signed Greg Monroe. Random people are being pulled that you have not heard of for 3 or 4 years to come in and play games, because that league is insistent on playing, and they are insistent on, no matter how many guys you have out, we're pretty much going to suit up. And so I want to know for you, if the NFL got to that point where, and we're getting there, but if they're just signing random people off the street, which 3 players would you like to see come out that isn't currently in football? They're not even playing in football. Like Greg Monroe is either playing in China or not even playing anymore. Like, we're bringing people outside of the sport that have been out of it for a year or two. Who are you bringing back in for this COVID emergency time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people probably would have said Kyle Sloter for the Vikings, and oh look, they signed him yesterday.
Back.
He's got a cult following, right? I think that probably would have been on many lists. I hear Brett Favre has all these money problems. I think he probably could use a good game check or two to help him out down there in Mississippi. So I think Brett's still got some bullets to fire. I think he's still got the old gunslinger can dust off the old shoulder. And I see pictures of John Randall too, man. He looks like he could still kind of get off the ball and get around some of those mediocre guards in the league. I think that Randall could be a nice veteran pickup at this stage in his life. These are all completely unrealistic. I think that's part of the fun.
Yes.
I'd love Percy Harvin too. I mean, Percy Harvin is not that old yet. He's still is football playing age. I would take Percy back in a heartbeat.
I think I want to see Jared Allen has kind of switched to curling now. That's his thing. But if we could bring him back for a little bit, let him get going outside on the edge, might not be the worst thing for the Vikings. That's where I went. And then everyone's favorite reoccurring Viking that has popped up in the Mike Zimmer era. Where's Terrence Newman? Why can't he just do it again?
Yeah.
I mean, the corners at the Vikings, get rid of Breland. Why not just bring Terrence Newman in? Can't be that much worse. And yeah, I mean, those are 2 former Vikings. I'd love them sign right now. And then you got the obvious ones, obviously, like Phillip Rivers might be signing with the Colts by the time you listen to this. Maybe he is, now that Carson Wentz is out for a week with an injury. It's funny that Drew Brees could be in this hypothetical, but he turned it down already. He said, I'm good golfing. I'm good being on NBC. I do not need to be doing this. That's kind of how I hope most former NFL players, especially if they were top level, would decide to do this. Like Marshawn Lynch, you don't need to come back and play again. Just let your legacy be your legacy. Drew Brees, let your legacy be your legacy. I don't need you to come back for one game to be a fill-in. Same thing with Jared Allen. But yeah, I think my top 2 are Jared Allen and Terrence Newman. Bring him back. Bring the Vikings some fortification here in these last 2 games. Give them a last drive. Zimmer's going to go out with your guys. Go out with Newman. Give him a chance. Let him run. So that's what I would say there.
Let me hit you with a just knee-jerk reaction, because you bring up Allen, beloved figure. Vikings have had a lot of big defensive ends that have kind of had that popularity. So I'm thinking modern defensive ends. Let's go Allen, Robinson, Hunter, and Griffin. What rank the popularity of those 4?
I think because of where the Vikings were, the big games they played in with Jared Allen, and kind of the reputation around that defensive line when Allen and Robinson were in there, those feel like 1-2 to me. And then Everson versus Daniil, I mean, it's weird to put Daniil 4th in terms of how much people care about them, because he's probably the best one out of them. But I think Everson just has such a connection to this fan base. Even when he's on the Lions, he's tweeting about the Vikings. Everyone's wanting him to come back. And then I think, part of it is they connect with him and they connect with the struggles that he's gone through. And I think he's really become a fabric of the Vikings organization. And so Everson would slot in for 3, and then Daniil Hunter weirdly is 4.
Yeah, I would go Allen, Griffin, Robinson, Hunter. But yeah, Hunter's just the cold-blooded assassin who really has no emotion. He doesn't resonate. He's not quite as marketable, maybe, because he doesn't want to be. He's just not that personality, even though he's probably number 1 in the list of amazing football players.
All right, we're running a little long, but we're going to do one more here. I want to know biggest thorns in the Vikings sides. I was hoping to do this question last week. We didn't get a chance to, but after the Akeem Hicks game again against the Vikings, just always a big thorn in the Viking side. And then this week, the Vikings are kind of always, or have always been a thorn in Matt Stafford's side. So we saw that again this past week. He did not look good. And if you stack Stafford's performances up over his career against the NFC North teams, obviously the teams that he played the most other than this year, the Vikings are easily the team he has performed worst against. So kind of taking that back, but then pushing it back onto the Vikings, these Akeem Hicks type players. I want to know, maybe we're not going to like an Aaron Rodgers level because he is a thorn in everyone's side. He is just the roadblock. But if we're just talking about annoyances, people that you just didn't like to see, people you were worried about, maybe not wrecking the game, but just always consistently seemed to get the Vikings number. What are some of those names? What are like your top 2 or 3?
Yeah, maybe you can help me out with this one, Paul, because it is a little tougher in football when you do only play 3 teams every year. It's not like baseball where, you think, oh, A-Rod, they played him every year, or Jose Batista there for a while where he just murdered him, or Nelson Cruz when he wasn't on the Twins. There's those players that every year they come across and they destroy you. It's not that way in football. You might only see some really good players once every 4 years. Alshon Jeffrey weirdly came to mind. There was a stretch there in the early 2010s where he was totally dominant against those porous Vikings defenses with Jay Cutler. And in that same time frame, Calvin Johnson was also crazy good. And I could probably throw Greg Jennings in that mix as well. Like basically any receiver who played the Vikings from about, 2000 to 2015, there were some bad defenses in there with some good ones as well. But there were a lot of porous defenses that kind of got victimized by the NFC North's top receivers. More abstractly, what about winless Lions teams? They always give the Vikings problems. I mean, they've now beaten them twice in the 20-year span, and they almost beat them twice more in their actual winless season in 2008. Not only once did the Vikings almost lose to them, but twice that season, Minnesota flirted with disaster against the 0-16 Lions. I mean, how many teams get that many opportunities to lose against wretched opponents that have no wins? The Vikings seem making an adventure every time.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. I stuck with players, and like you, I stuck with NFC North players just because those are the guys that they're going to play very often. Akeem Hicks has to be mentioned, although we mentioned it off the top, but in 10 games against the Vikings, he has 8.5 sacks. 8.5 sacks for Akeem Hicks in 10 games is
for a defensive tackle.
14 tackles for loss. So absolutely owns that thorn in the side and could even rise above that. Some interesting ones just from my childhood. I remember as a Vikings fan always fearing Devin Hester. 4 of his 18 return touchdowns were against the Vikings. So that's, basically 25% of his touchdowns came against the Vikings, which is obviously not doesn't line up with the amount of times he played the Vikings. That is much more than any other team. And then another one, just a sneaky one, Marvin Jones has been weirdly 10 games against the Vikings, 50 catches, 9 touchdowns in 10 games against the Vikings. So consistent threat. Didn't really come to mind off the top of my head. I had to do some research and was just looking at some of the common Vikings, weapons that they were going against. And Marvin Jones popped up, basically averaging 75 yards a game and a touchdown. Not game-breaking numbers, but certainly, if we're talking about thorns, was always a red zone threat and just seemed to be one the Vikings couldn't figure out. But yeah, Akeem Hicks has to be up top, and I think Hester's another good one.
Hester's a great one. I mean, there was probably a 3-year stretch where I think he had a return every year. Yeah. And there was one notable game where it was Peterson's rookie year. He had a huge monster performance, and the Vikings did end up winning, but the Bears had a return touchdown from Hester, and then they hit Hester on a deep go route with like 1 minute left to tie the game. And it appeared like it was going to go to overtime, but then Peterson went back for the kickoff return. He took it into Bears territory, and I think he was either Longwell or Edinger. We'll go with Go with I think it was Paul Edinger at the time. I think he walked him off with a field goal. Could be wrong on who that was.
Someone will correct you. Yeah.
I'm changing my mind. It was Longwell. I think
Okay.
it was Longwell. I think, and the Vikings won that game.
Yeah, no, great ones. And again, of course, Hester has to hurt the Vikings with his receiving, not just his return. So he was hurting even in one of the biggest moments. They let the kick returner do something really, really good on the offensive side of the ball. I think that's symbolic of a Vikings thorn. So Sam, thank you so much. Vikings going up against probably their biggest thorn ever, Aaron Rodgers, coming up this Sunday. Sam, Matt will have coverage of that. Sam, thank you for your time.
Appreciate it, Paul. Always fun.